Hello, and welcome to the Housing Ombudsman Service podcast today. I'm Victoria King, one of the sector learning and development leads here at the Housing Ombudsman Service. And today we're going to be talking about knowledge and information management, or KIM. There's got to be an acronym in there, KIM for senior leaders. I have the pleasure of being joined today by Sarah and Catherine. Sarah, would you like to come on and introduce yourself and then hand over to Catherine?
Yeah, morning, Victoria. So I'm an insight and systemic manager in our insight and development team. So I support the team in generating insight into the housing sector and associated complaints. So one of the things I do with that insight is to lead thematic spotlight reports into issues identified. And the purpose of this is to promote good practice in the sector. So the knowledge and information management report, that's one of these thematic reports. And Catherine, one of my lovely leads, I'll hand over to her.
Thank you. So I'm Catherine. I'm one of the insight and systemic leads. A key part of my role is conducting special investigations when systemic issues are identified with a landlord or within the sector.
You both. So we've already recorded a podcast on our knowledge and information management spotlight report. So for those listening, if you haven't already given that a listen, please look back through our back catalogue and give that one a listen. That was with Zoe. So we've been running loads of virtual workshops through our Centre for Learning here at the Housing Ombudsman Service for the past year. And we've attended quite a few speaking events, and we've talked to lots of staff within landlord organisations. One of the big things that staff were telling us, that landlord staff were telling us, was that we keep being asked, how do we get senior management buy-in into the recommendations, into the spotlight report on knowledge and information management? Why is it important that senior managers are leading the way in respect of good knowledge and information management?
Well, clearly information is critical to landlords in being able to provide their services. And, senior leaders, they really do set the tone for an organisation. So they need to ensure that good KIM is an organisational priority. And I think leadership, it forms the heart of an organisation's culture. So they need to create a culture where at all levels, staff really value information and knowledge, but also that they know what's expected of them when creating and using that information, but also they have the systems to manage that information. So in terms of leading the way, senior managers, they need to ensure that KIM is really at the forefront of their strategic thinking, to provide that sense of direction and structure for staff. And I think to simplify things, I find it helps to think of senior managers having two kind of key responsibilities. So it's about both setting a framework around managing that information, but also bringing a real focus to it to build recognition of the value of having good KIM management, and a sense of professional pride really in maintaining the standard set. But clearly, strategy is just the starting point. So the real task at hand is also ensuring this is embedded and empowering the teams to use all the relevant systems and tools.
Thank you, Sarah. So what's the risk of having poor knowledge and information management? What is the risk within those social housing organisations? I know in the report we talk about, without good information management, a landlord can't, horizon scan and identify risks, that contingency plan, have those be proactive in addressing hazards like fire safety, asbestos, damp and mould. That they can't fully comply with those legal requirements and ensure that they have that evidence-based approach and more importantly provide that high quality service to residents. In addition to that, could you just build on that and just tell us more about the risk of having poor knowledge and information management?
Without good data on its homes and its residents, the landlord really is limited in its ability to provide a safe and high quality service to its residents. So within the risks that the landlord faces, you have financial and reputational and health and safety, to name a few. So just to elaborate on a few of those further, so within financial risks or financial loss, you have the cost of repeatedly procuring and enhancing systems. This can have a disruptive effect on operations and can also result in the loss or unlawful destruction of records, for which the landlord could face fines for data losses or illegal disclosures. There's also the impact on staff. So if they have difficulty accessing or sharing information, this impacts their time and can decrease their productivity. And also, incorrect information held on residents or properties can also lead to incorrect decisions. So all of that combined can really impact morale of your staff and can lead to a higher staff turnover as well. There's an impact on the reporting. So poor record keeping, that can impact the ease and accuracy of responding to freedom of information requests or subject access requests. It can impact the ease and accuracy of providing the data that's required for the housing revenue accounts or the HCLIC returns on homelessness. And also in line with the new consumer standards, which have been set by the regulator, especially those relating to the condition of the property and the needs of the people who live in them. So recently, a couple of recent instances of that include Octavia Housing, who were unable to provide the evidence that it's meeting its health and safety requirements, and it doesn't actually hold the complete and accurate records for all of its safety inspections. And also Sheffield City Council, who don't have an accurate record of the condition of its tenants' homes. Under the new TSMs, landlords are also required to collect and publish their results. These will be scrutinised by the regulator. So the accuracy and the quality of the information that landlords are providing here really is key. Another important point to consider is that the ICO have said that poor data protection practices are more likely to harm its residents who require extra support from the landlord. So that could be those with a language barrier, those with health issues, those that are victims of domestic abuse. Poor data recording can also result in discrimination, for example. And if the landlord fails to make appropriate reasonable adjustments, it may be discriminating under Section 21 of the Equality Act 2010. Record keeping is also vital for effective safeguarding, and this goes back to my previous point on victims of domestic abuse. So it's vital for effective safeguarding and for identifying and managing risks in multi-agency working. So that could be MAPA or MARAC or under child protection plans. And these records and any information that was stored or shared or not shared can also be scrutinised if there is a domestic homicide or a serious case review. So ultimately, and in the worst case scenarios, from the information that, you know, the details that I've given there really, you can see that poor knowledge and information management puts your residents and your staff at risk of injury or death. And this is why it's so vital that senior leaders really need to engage with this topic.
Some really, really big risks there. So something senior leaders really should be interested in. So for those senior leaders who are listening to this podcast, what should they be doing to ensure good knowledge and information management within their organisation?
Okay, well, I'd suggest that senior leaders, they start by being clear on their own internal KIM standards. So this is reflected in recommendation 7 of the KIM Spotlight report. I'll just read it, it's quite long. So it's develop organisational key data recording standard requirements that will ensure good records that support the business and demonstrate compliance with national standards. So this includes setting out the minimum standard to which data must be entered on the various databases that the landlord owns. And really, without understanding their own internal KIM standards, they're going to struggle to implement any of the other recommendations. And too often, I think knowledge and information management has previously been seen as a bit of an administrative burden, whereas I'd really encourage senior leaders, to focus on how their organisation manages this information as an asset. And the type of questions senior managers should be considering and asking themselves is good KIM built into policy and process reviews? Is sufficient time and resources being put into providing the necessary guidance and training? But also recognising that good KIM is an ongoing process, a one-off course isn't likely to meet needs. Do you have adequate systems that audit against the information they provide, and do you upgrade these regularly where necessary? And complaints, they're a brilliant source of learning. So are you using the feedback from complaints to improve? And similarly, FOI requests and subject access requests, have a look what is being asked, and could this information be more readily available? And senior leaders obviously look at reporting closely. So what are the issues and why? And what are you having to identify that your system can't generate reports on? And another really critical one is listen to your frontline staff. So what challenges are they facing to ensure good KIM? And I know we touched on a number of these in our KIM Spotlight report. So of course, use the KIM Spotlight to self-assess and help prioritise your next steps.
Thank you, Sarah. So, have you got any examples from the social housing sector of cases of poor knowledge and information management that have come to light over the years?
So yes, the following cases all had findings of severe maladministration in relation to record keeping, and they were listed in the Ombudsman's press release, which is dated the 21st of May 2024, and that's available on our website. So the first case is Lewisham Council, and it relates to roof repairs. So within this case, the landlord's records gave very little indication of what work had actually been carried out and when, or if repairs had taken place at all. There were also third-party repairs that were carried out on the property, and these had actually invalidated a guarantee and potentially caused other issues in the roof, but the landlord was actually unable to say when these happened due to its record keeping or lack of. And even after these issues had occurred, it still then failed to update its record system appropriately. And all of this meant that the resident waited nearly 2 years for a resolution to their roof repairs. Within this case, there was also 2 other severe maladministration findings, one for the repairs to the roof and one for the complaint handling. So within this case, the Ombudsman ordered the landlord to pay 2,200 compensation and to apologise to the resident and to conduct a full inspection of the condition of the roof. We also found severe maladministration for Gateshead Council in its record keeping in a case involving damp and mould. So the landlord no longer had the surveyor reports because of a change of contractor. And so because it didn't have those reports, and despite it already knowing the extent of the problem, it had to repeat a survey to see what was required. During the handling of the resident's case, the landlord also changed the member of staff that was dealing with the case, but it didn't have the processes in place to make sure that the existing information was passed over. This then placed the onus on the resident to repeat the previous events that had happened and to share its emails and correspondence with the landlord. This case, we also found severe maladministration in the overall handling of the landlord and how it dealt with the damp and mould, as well as the associated complaint handling. And within this case, the Ombudsman ordered the landlord to pay 8,800 in compensation, for the chief executive to apologise to the resident in person, and again for the landlord to complete an inspection of the full property to assess its conditions and the works that were still required. In another case where we found severe maladministration on record keeping, it related to PA Housing's record keeping in a domestic abuse complaint. So within this one, the landlord was unable to locate any of the complaints that the resident had previously sent through, as they'd been sent to incorrect teams. This resulted in 4 complaints being raised by the resident over the course of a year, with no action being taken by the landlord. There was also no record of the resident's vulnerabilities stored on the landlord's system. And additionally, within this case, after the resident had informed the landlord that she had actually fled the property due to domestic abuse, the ex-partner then called into the landlord to get the tenancy changed into his name. As the landlord was not able to establish from its records that the resident had contacted it first, a fraud case was raised, as it was believed that the resident had actually abandoned the property without updating the landlord. There were 2 other severe maladministration findings in this case, one for the way that the landlord had handled the domestic abuse complaint and one for the associated complaint handling. On this case, the Ombudsman ordered the landlord to pay 1,500 in compensation, to contact the local authority to ensure that it had all the relevant information relating to the resident's reason for homelessness, and also for the chief executive of the landlord to apologise to the resident.
Thank you, Catherine. We'll put the link to the press release and those cases in the show notes. So if anybody listening does want to have a good read of those cases in a bit more detail, you'll be able to click on the link in the show notes. So thank you very much, Catherine. So we're going to be producing a follow-up report on the Spotlight on Knowledge and Information Management later in 2024, which will have a lot more detail in there about what organisations are doing. But in the meantime, whilst we're waiting for that to come out, could you share with us some of the examples of what organisations have been doing to embed the recommendations in the original report into their organisation? And if possible, if you've got these, the impact of these interventions.
Yes, of course. So through the webinars and engagement with landlords, we've got a number of great examples as to how the Spotlight recommendations have been approached. So one example, a landlord outlined how they'd undertaken a gap analysis of the recommendations, and they've given each board member a recommendation to own and report the progress on. So this has ensured senior level buy-in and ownership. Another landlord, they allocated data owners, so this was directors or board members and data stewards, who are more head of areas, to work with a member of their data team to manage that data area and produce reports. And they told us this approach was really useful, particularly in approaching lettings and void periods. One landlord focused on a cultural shift from data being seen as an IT problem to a business problem. And they set this out as a theme in their corporate plan with their senior leadership team and in every new project. So they really ensured that KIM was embedded from the start. Another really great example, a KIM benchmarking group was set up in London. That was to facilitate collaboration and knowledge sharing among organisations who are interested in improving their KIM practices. So this group, they've conducted benchmarking studies on specific KIM topics, also facilitated the sharing of best practices, case studies and success stories amongst the members. Another area which we've seen some really innovative approaches is in respect to identifying and recording vulnerabilities. So some landlords, they've undertaken a big door knock around their estate so they can see residents in their home and also perhaps reach those who are not so digitally enabled. Another landlord had staff from across the business shadowing housing officers on house calls to really get to know the residents, and then they could feedback changes so these could be recorded on the systems. So yeah, hopefully that's given some food for thought, but I'm really excited to hear more examples from landlords in the KIM follow-up evaluation.
Lovely, thank you, Sarah. Thank you very much. So on to my final question then. So what are the key benefits for senior management if they improve knowledge and information management in their organisation?
Yes, so there's huge benefits of ensuring good knowledge and information management. Through our casework, we really see overwhelming evidence that accurate data about housing stock and residents is essential in delivering efficient and effective services, because ultimately, the decision and actions, they're being made based on good quality information, and this really reduces business risks. Good records mean clear information is quickly and easily available to any member of staff who becomes responsible for responding to any particular matter. It also supports smoother handovers. Staff can clearly see what has happened on the case up until that point. And also they're not having to rely on the resident repeating that information, which can be hugely frustrating for the resident. And this efficiency reduces costs. There's also financial savings from reducing the likelihood of needing to award residents compensation, so whether through their own complaints process or housing ombudsman referrals, and running alongside this closely is reducing that reputational risk. I think it's also important to think about how staff morale and retention, because effective KIM can really have an impact on this. It can be very demoralising working somewhere where you don't have the information you need to do a good job on a day-to-day basis. And also, if you think about communication with residents, good KIM really improves it as staff, they can access relevant up-to-date information to understand the issue, but also what action has been taken or not and why that is. So it's got a real benefit of improving relationships and building trust. And ultimately, if a housing provider, if they're asked to explain what's happened and why, for example, when a complaint is made to HOS or perhaps when ICO is investigating, having those good quality records will enable it to answer the questions and provide the evidence to why it has or hasn't done something. So, clearly not being able to do this would negatively impact its credibility. And I think, Kat, you had a couple of examples of the benefits. Kat, I think you had a couple of short case examples that you were going to run through that really bring to life the benefits of good KIM.
I do, yes, thank you. So the first case in this one actually relates to Bristol City Council. The resident raised a complaint with the landlord, and within the complaint, one of the points was they stated that the landlord held incorrect records about the resident's mental health, and also citing that the resident had a visual and hearing impairment. And the resident actually specified they never had such disabilities. So within its response, the landlord acknowledged that it did hold this information on its system relating to the resident having disabilities. However, it was able to evidence from its own records that the information regarding those disabilities had been gathered from the resident's own housing application and was therefore provided by the resident themselves. It did state that on being made aware of the inaccuracy of the information, the landlord confirmed that it had updated its records. So because all of this was reasonable and in line with data protection regulations, we found no maladministration in this case. And the second case that I have here is for Six Town Housing Limited. So within this case, the resident complained that the landlord had falsely accused him of ASB and had placed an alert on his file. So within its response to the resident, the landlord explained that the alert placed on the file was a do not visit alone marker. And the purpose of this was to make sure that its staff were aware that the visit to the resident's properties were to be conducted in pairs. It said the marker had been placed on the resident's file following threatening behaviour by the resident, and this behaviour had actually been logged with the police as well. And the landlord stated it had a duty to safeguard the health and safety of its employees. This was a reasonable response by the landlord. The alert on the file was a proportionate response to the perceived risk to its staff. The landlord itself had a procedure of zero tolerance, abuse, threats and violence towards its staff, and it was acting in line with this. The landlord confirmed to the resident in its final complaint response that it was due to review the alert that was placed on the file, and it said the resident would be advised of the outcome of this. So within this case, all of that was an appropriate action to take to ensure that the alert was proportionate to the current risk level from the resident. And we felt that the landlord had appropriately explained why it had taken the action it had taken within its complaint responses. We made a finding of no maladministration on the landlord's decision in this case to place the alert on the resident's file. So I think both of these cases really do highlight the importance of accurate record keeping in order to be able to evidence the actions and the decisions that landlords are taking towards their residents.
Yeah, so it's that really accurate, contemporaneous, I love that word, record, where it's recorded as soon as reasonably practicable after that conversation or that exchange with the resident has happened, and that it doesn't contain any views or biases. It's just really accurate information, and it's what actions are going to be taken, but also what actions are not going to be taken, and the rationale for those, and having all of that supporting evidence on the system.
Definitely, yes.
Thank you very much for your time today, Sarah and Catherine. It's been lovely talking to you. For those listening, if you're interested in finding out more about knowledge and information management, do check out our Spotlight on Knowledge and Information Management report. We're in the process of developing some workshops, virtual workshops for senior leaders on this particular topic. So keep an eye out for those via the Centre for Learning. And whilst we're on the topic of the Centre for Learning, check it out via our website. We've got loads of virtual workshops, loads of e-learning and micro-learning, podcast case studies, and we're adding to it all the time. So have a look at that. Sign up to our Centre for Learning Learning Hub, and let's keep learning together, guys. Right. Thank you very much, and we'll speak to you again soon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.